Today I want to talk about the considerations that you need to think about if you're going to invest into the Brisbane marketplace. And I know I've got quite a few friends who've got multi-million dollar property portfolios where the entire portfolio is made up of Brisbane real estate. So it's a wonderful market to consider, but there's a few things you need to think about if you're an interstate investor investing in that market that's specific to Brisbane that you don't often see elsewhere. And the first one is flood zones. You need to be aware that there was a big flood in 1974, there was a big flood in 2011, and a lot of houses went underwater, and in some cases significantly went underwater. So the Brisbane City Council has flood maps that you can go on and see. If you're checking out a property, it's free. You can check it out and see, was this property underwater at any stage in the past? And in my view, as someone who helps other people buy into that market, I will not risk them in any way if the property has been underwater before, no matter how minimal that impact was. Because it's important that we understand that they've got it's called the 1 in 100 year flood, which doesn't mean it happens once every 100 years. It just means it's got a 1% chance of happening every year. So if you think about 1974 to 2011, that was about 37 years apart. So it's important that we know and we understand where those precedent marks are so that we can avoid that. And you can find some really wonderful investment grade properties that are outside of those flood prone areas. So number one consideration is make sure you consult the flood zone maps. Number two is the lifestyle in Brisbane is unique. It's very laid back. So you need to understand what the locals want rather than imposing your interstate paradigm. So for example, a carport is totally fine in Brisbane, whereas in Melbourne you want a lock-up garage. In Sydney you want it to be locked up. In Brisbane, a carport is totally fine. In Brisbane you need an air conditioner because the heat can be intense, particularly that December, January, February period. And also knowing that the beautiful period homes, they've got scarcity and everyone loves them, but you're going to have a lot of maintenance because that sun is harsh on the building materials there. So it's important that you understand these quirks that you get in that marketplace, and therefore don't impose your interstate paradigms necessarily in that market. The third consideration is the main two drivers in Brisbane is proximity to the city and proximity to the river. Because they don't have that traditional western suburbs feel. Because if you think about the Brisbane River that runs through the city, some of the best suburbs are in the west on the river. So it's not as if it has that west and east stigma. But it's important to know that you don't go to Brisbane for a beach lifestyle. And that's, in your mind you're thinking going to Queensland, it's all about the beach. But Brisbane has Moreton Island and North Stradbroke Island. A bit further north it's got Bribie Island, which actually shields the surf coming in. So it's really sort of a mud flat region on the coast near Brisbane. So it's not as if everyone's flocking there. What they're doing is they're going up to Caloundra on the Sunshine Coast, which is the first beach that you get when you go north, or down to Main Beach on the Gold Coast, which is the first real swimming beach when you go south. So it's important to understand that in Sydney, it's all about the beach lifestyle. In Brisbane, it's not about the beach lifestyle. Often it's about the proximity to getting on the arterial roads that can get you to the Gold Coast and get you to the Sunshine Coast so that you can enjoy those lifestyle options on the weekend. The fourth thing to consider is you should embrace the hills, particularly in the north. It's really hilly. But if you think about the climate that they have there, they really want to embrace that because you want the breeze that's coming in to help take away some of that heat. Everyone loves a really great outlook. It's a real outdoor lifestyle, particularly in those non-sweltering summer days. I mean, in the middle of winter, it's still beautiful weather there. So it's important that you embrace those hills, but be aware to avoid living areas that get that westerly sun aspect because it's really scorching in the afternoon. And you'll notice as you drive around Brisbane, particularly on the western side, they've got a lot of shutters that go over the windows to protect from that. And be particularly careful when you've got a property that has a westerly aspect looking at water, because as that sun goes down, the bounce off the water straight into the property is really, really intense. But for all intensive purposes in Brisbane, embrace the hills because it's part of the lifestyle. And the last thing for me to consider is it's one big city council. Greater Brisbane is one city council. Whereas if you think about Sydney and Melbourne and Perth and Adelaide, you've got a few suburbs in one council and a few suburbs in another council, and what you can do in that suburb might be vastly different to what you can do in that suburb because the councils have different rules. It's actually a real advantage in Brisbane because you've got typically a similar set of rules. So it's not as if there's these vastly different things that you can do in each suburb because of the fact that they have one set of regulations and one council. So that is a real advantage in my view when you're going into Brisbane as a marketplace, particularly if you're looking for something to add value to, because you can see precedent all around the city as to what you may be able to do. So for me, there's a few things for you to consider. If you're an interstate investor, if you're in Perth, you're in Adelaide, you're in Hobart, you're in Melbourne, and you want to go into that particular market, there's some considerations that you need to have at the back of your mind and make sure that you use that intel when you're buying property. Because right now, Greater Brisbane has roughly 2.3 million people, but it's going to grow to about 4.2 million by 2050. So lots of people are coming into that market. So it's a wonderful market to consider, particularly if you're playing the long game. But bear in mind that there's a few little quirks when it comes to investing in Brisbane property.